In Module 8, we're looking at dynamic endpoints. Now let's talk a little bit about what these mean. Of course, when you build your site, you can have any static files in your public directory. So for instance, I might have like a data.json file. That's just static content that I can hit at any point by going to the root of my site / whatever the file name is, which happens to be data.json. I will get all that data back. However, what if I want that to be dynamic? So let's say I have a content collection that might have things like products connected to my site. Well, if I want to be able to query that at any time, hit that endpoint and then get that data returned to me, I would need that data to be connected to my actual build process in some way. This is the point of dynamic endpoints. When I build my site, I can have Astro take that content collection data and build it into a JSON file so that I can hit it with a get endpoint and always get back the most recent data. Now that's with static site generation mode. This can be enhanced if you turn on SSR mode. That not only allows you to get data, but you can get it actively when somebody hits this endpoint. You can also enhance this with other methods. So for instance, you can even do things like post requests or patch requests or delete requests. In other words, you have full API route capability in SSR mode with these dynamic endpoints. Now there are a couple things that are important here to note. Number one, this is always only server side. So in static site generation mode, it's simply going to build that on build, server side, and then output a static file. If you're in SSR mode, whenever somebody hits that endpoint with a GET or POST request, whatever you happen to set up, it will do all the computation on the server and then simply return to you a finished file. The second thing to note is that this is not only for data. You could also do this for things like image files if you want to and generate them live on the fly. Now, when would you use something like this? Well, of course, you could just use it to get data. So for instance, you might have a React component that's going to control all its own styling, all its own HTML, and you want to actually reach out, grab the data from your content collections. Well, one really easy way to do that is to create a static file on output when you build that your React component can then query, grab all the data it needs, and you'll always make sure that it's live based on whatever your last build was. Of course, if you're in SSR mode, it'll also be live, but it will do that dynamically when you hit that endpoint. Another use case would be to actually set up full API routes. So perhaps in these routes, you would interact with a database of some kind, actually posting and requesting items, enabling full CRUD operation. Now, just like with any other endpoints, you can interact with them in two different places. You can do it in the front matter of any Astro file, and that will allow you to do that fetch or post or whatever it happens to be server side. You can also do it in the client as well. In the front matter, you need to provide the full URL. So just to make sure you can do it in both dev and production mode, usually you use astro.url, and then you tack on the rest of the path after that. For a client-side code, both in production and dev mode, you can simply reference it at the final build place for that file. So that's a little bit about the why for dynamic endpoints, also how you'd set it up and the difference between SSG and SSR, and then also a few use cases as well. Finally, we looked at where to actually use this in an Astro file. In the next lesson, we're going to look at building a static JSON endpoint using a GET request and SSG mode. In this lesson, we're going to build out a static JSON endpoint. You can grab the starter code in the description to this lesson, but you can see that once you get it up and running with npm install and then npm run dev, it's just a product like homepage with 3 different products in it. Now we're actually pulling this from a content collection that I've created, but what I want to talk about is how we might use this in a JSON endpoint. Now to start with, if I come over here, you're going to notice that in this public directory, I actually have a data file that looks very similar to what our content collections will produce. And of course, I could just have this as a static file. So let's say I would go to data.json, and this is just the static JSON that would be returned to me. So this is essentially what we want, except instead of making it a static file like this, we want it to be built every time we build our site. That way, the data always matches whatever is currently on our site. So that's the whole idea of building a dynamic endpoint. So let me close this down. And what we're looking at is building some kind of route right here, which means it needs to be in the pages directory. Again, that's how Astro develops routes. Now, conventionally, I put this inside of an API folder. You can do whatever you want. It doesn't have to be inside of an API folder. But then what we're going to do is name a file with the format we want it to eventually end with, and we'll tack on either TS or JS, whatever you're comfortable with. In this case, I'll be using TypeScript, but we're not going to be using a ton of TypeScript, so it shouldn't be a big deal if you use JavaScript instead. So we're going to simply call this something like products.json.ts. Now this will build a route at this exact place. So API/products.json. So the TS you don't have to include, it's just the .json. So let me close down that side and jump over to the docs right over this way. You're going to notice that, like I said, you have to end it with either JS or TS, and then you just want to name it according to whatever file type you want. So in this case, I know I want it to return JSON, so I'm just going to end it with .json. Now these functions you do have to name very precisely. It's actually this capital GET if you want to do a GET request. So in other words, anytime I hit this endpoint with a GET request, I should get back this data. So I have to name the function GET like this. Now there is some type safety if you want to. So let me come down this way in this API route right here. So I'm just going to use this instead. And then I'll hit Control and Spacebar to pull in that type. Now, I'm getting some errors here because you have to actually return a response. So let's come back up this way now and just grab this right here, and we're just going to drop this in right here. Okay, so just like that, if we hit this get endpoint, anything at products.json, then we should get back this response right here. So let's go ahead and come over this way. And remember, I named mine API. You can do whatever you want. So it's in the API directory. And then inside here, we'd have products.json. Now you can see this is exactly what I get back right over here. But of course, we don't have to return just static strings. The whole point of this is that you'd want to return some kind of dynamic data. Now, quickly before we do that, here I've broken out the params and the requests. These are two different things you can get here, but the entire thing is just a context. So if I want, I can just come over here and grab the context like this. And then let's go ahead and console log the context. Now remember, this is all done server side, so I'm going to need to look at my terminal when I actually run this. So as soon as I hit this over here, it should return to me something down this way, and that's what it does. Now here I'm in static site generation mode, and in static site generation mode, you essentially only have access to the URL. You do have access to a few other things like locals. That comes along with middleware, which we'll talk about later. But the rest of this stuff is not super helpful, because really the whole point of using this in static site generation mode is you just want to grab whatever data is there, get it, and then do something with it. Now you might remember that we actually destructured the params and the request. So those are the two things we got to start with, and that's how it was set up when I copied it over from the documentation. So if I go back to that, you'll see that I had the params and the request, but you can get anything off that context object that you might need. Now in this case, I'm not going to use anything from there, so let's just get rid of that altogether. Now I want to do something right here, which is I want to define what I want this to export on build. And I've actually got a big help over here in this products page right here. So if I come back to my home page, you're going to see that I've got this building only showing things that are in stock. If I jump over here and we look at something like one of the headphones, for instance, and I come up top and let's go ahead and change this to false, because this is dynamically building, it's going to now remove this from the list. If I had just a static file, like I have over here in the public directory, obviously I'd have to go manually update this file. So that's the reason why we'd want this to be dynamic instead of us building this ourselves. So what I'm going to do is take this request right here and just drop it in over here. So whenever this get endpoint is hit, I want it to actually query my products live at that moment. If I hit Control and Spacebar, I should be able to import that function, get collection. It will type it all properly for me as well. Now, if I come over here, let's look at our data.json file. That's the static file in our public directory. You're going to see it's an array of all these items. Now, all I have to do is drop right inside here my products, and I will get something very similar. However, remember with content collections, you get a bunch of functions along with it. You get some other data as well, like the collection it's a part of. So really all I want is the data, the front matter from each of those files. So again, if I open up one of these, like the headphones, I just want this stuff right here. I don't want all the other stuff that comes along with content collection. So I could just map over this and grab each of the items. We'll just call it D for now. And I just want to return the D.data. All right, so now if I come over here, let's go back to our API endpoint right here and refresh. You'll notice that's exactly what I get right here. So I get all the same data that I was looking for, except notice it's cut out one of the products because it doesn't match this query right here, that it has to be in stock. Anytime that data changes, then this dynamic endpoint on build would update as well. Now, of course, this is all static site, so it's only on build that this will update, but it's still better than manually updating a file. Now, in this case, I'm obviously querying content collections, which means in Astro files, I would just get those content collections myself using the same method. So I don't necessarily need this for something with Astro. But what if I wanted to use something like React or some kind of front-end UI framework to grab data from my content collections? So let me go ahead and stop the dev server and let's add a React. So I'll use the Astro CLI to add React, and it should add some packages, update my Astro config, and update my TS config. All right, so npm run dev, let's get this thing back up and running. And then let me go ahead and come over here. Let's create another folder here. We're going to call it components, and then we'll simply have React like list.tsx. Inside here, let me go ahead and scaffold out a basic React project. All right, so over here, let's just do a couple basic things. So I'm going to come in here, and first of all, we're going to grab products, and we'll do set products. We'll get this both from useState, and right now this will start as an empty array. We're going to do a use effect whenever this loads to update the actual array of products. So let's come inside here and let's just do use effect. And let's go ahead and just return here and make sure that we have an empty dependency array. And then we need a function so we can call this asynchronously. So we'll call this something like fetch products equals async. And now inside here, we can actually asynchronously fetch those from our dynamic endpoint. So say const res equals await. And then we're just going to fetch here at API products.json, right? So this is a file right now in dev mode at localhost 4321. Eventually it'll be at whatever site we build this at. Once I get that back, and of course you should do things like a try catch here, but we're just going to keep this real simple for now. I just want to await the res.json, and then I should be able to update set products with that data, right? So now it should update that live. Now I need to actually call this here, so let's do fetch products, and that way I can call this async thing right inside of the use effect. So whenever this loads, it should then dump it in right over here. So let's go ahead and get this in here. First of all, I probably just want to check to make sure that products.length is greater than 0. In other words, it needs to actually have some data in it. If that is the case, we're essentially going to do the same thing we did on the homepage. So let me come over here, this right here. So what we're going to do is take the products all here, and we'll just do the same thing over here. So we should products.map and then return that data. Class name right here. And then the other thing I want to do is right now I'm destructuring data, whereas you can see how my endpoint is right here. I actually have all the data right here, so I don't have to destructure the data. Now, if I come over here, you'll notice it's still not working properly. And the reason for that is because I need to let this React component not only control its hydrated JavaScript, it also needs to control all of its own HTML. I can do that with a special client directive. So right over here, that client directive is called only. And I briefly mentioned this when I introduced the idea of UI frameworks, but one of the things you can do is say, hey, let this client component control not just its JavaScript. In other words, don't just hydrate it with JavaScript, let it control all its own HTML as well. You do have to pass the name of the UI framework, in this case React, and then it should be able to render that out. So now it's actually controlling all of its own HTML and it's controlling all of its JavaScript. So you can see now I've got these things in stock and they're showing properly. Now we haven't really typed this, so it's a little angry with us. That's okay. We can deal with that. But you can see it is actually working properly. So if I come over here and I go back to my headphones and let's change this to in stock equals true, that should update my dynamic endpoint, which also means my React can now grab that live from my dynamic endpoint. Where's that endpoint? Well, it's right over here, this products.json, right? So as soon as I update my content collections, that API endpoint, well, I guess it's a static file endpoint at this point since we're in static site generation mode, will update live, which means my React component can also update live. So that's a use case for when you might want to use something like a just plain old get endpoint with static data. In the next lesson, we're going to look at another example of a static endpoint, and that will be to create an RSS feed so that every time you build your site, an RSS feed is updated with all the latest information. So for a practice use case, what we're going to do is add an RSS feed. And it's going to use the same kind of idea that we've been building in the last lesson where we built a static JSON endpoint, except in this case, it'll be XML because that's what is used for RSS. I'm sorry to have you do this again, but I included the starter files for this project right here. It's just the end of lesson 65. So if you already have that on your machine, you can just run right off the top of that. All we're going to do is take this blog that we wrote, this portfolio site that has this blog on it, and include some kind of RSS feed for the site. So what we're going to do is use a package called AstroJS/RSS. You'll notice here that what it does is it's just a helper for creating this API endpoint. So let me come over here. We're going to grab this install script. I'm going to come down here and just close that off. We'll go ahead and add this as an extra package. Now, before we start it up again, I want to come in here to my Astro config. What we're going to do is just make sure that we have a site attribute. You'll notice that this will be used to generate the links for our RSS articles. Now, right now, this says stargazers.club. You would want this to be whatever endpoint you ended up pushing up this portfolio to. Now, if you didn't end up publishing this anywhere, like on Netlify, don't worry about it. But this is what you want to make sure you update because this is what the RSS package uses to build all those endpoints. So just to say that you do need to have that. Now that I've got that, I can just do npm run dev, and this should be up and running. Now I do happen to be using SSR mode in hybrid, but for all practical intents and purposes, this will be a static site generated file because we're not going to declare pre-render to false. Hopefully that makes sense. Basically, we're using static site generation mode. Next, I'm going to come over this way, just following this tutorial right here, which I'll make sure to link in the description. We're going to add a file that ends in .xml.js. So let's just use this as an example, this RSS XML.js. Of course, you could do TypeScript here as well, but since the example doesn't use that, I won't use it either. So right here, let's go ahead and create this. And then all we have to do is import the RSS helper that will essentially help us build this dynamic endpoint. Now notice it's using the get function right here, which tells us this will be a get endpoint. And that makes sense because that's what would be happening with an RSS feed, right? Somebody would do a GET request to that endpoint and then get back an RSS feed in the form of XML. So let's go ahead and copy this right here. We'll just add it in over this way and close this down. Now notice you need to figure out how you want to generate these items. In this case, I know I'm using a content collection because we created that for the blog. So you can see down here, what you would do is just what you would expect. You would actually get a collection and then you would return the items down this way. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab this right here. We'll just come up top here above the actually returned RSS and await that. In order to await it, obviously we need to make sure that this is an async function. And then for the items, we would just map through them just like this. So let's come down here and we'll map through it like that. Oh, and I forgot to copy in the closing parentheses and all that. Now I do need to go ahead and make sure I've imported this file get collection. And then let's go ahead and check the config file that we used to set up the content collection. So I'll open this up at config.ts. We just want to make sure that the file or the type that we're exporting here was called posts. All right, so we need to name it posts here instead of blog. Well, we can leave the blog the same, but we need to actually grab the posts right here. Now, in the last lesson, we looked at the fact that in the context object, you have a bunch of different properties. One of them was site, and you can notice it's just pulling that in from the actual URL we're getting here when we do a GET request. We are getting some prettier problems, which means I need to add in a comma there, and we should be good. Now, the last thing to check is to make sure that all the things we're wanting to return here are actually in our config as well. So let's come back to our config. You'll notice we've got a title, we've got a description, an image, a pub date, and an is draft. So I'll come over here, title, description, pub date, custom data. We do not have this. Now, the link itself is not going to come from the data. It's just going to come from the slug that we get back. And that should be the case with any content collection. If it's a type of content, it should return to us a .slug. So we should be good right here. And for right now, I'm going to leave this post custom data out of it, but this would be a place where you might include things like an image if you wanted to, for instance, or an author's date or anything like that. Now, they give some examples, I believe, on this post, but you can also just look up how should I format things like an image or an author date, and you can return that here in this custom data. So I'm going to get rid of that for now. And then the last final thing to check is that this actually points to my actual post slug. So if I come over here, I don't remember what we named these. I just remember it was not very consistent. So it looks like blog works. Okay, cool. That's what I want. Blog / whatever it happens to be. So now I should have this at the base of my site, rss.xml. So if I come back over here, we should be able to do rss.xml. And look at that, it returns to us an actual RSS feed of all the posts on the site. Now notice because my site in my config says stargazers.club, that's what this is prefixed with everywhere. Obviously, you would want this to be updated with whatever your actual site was. Also, the channel itself is Buzz's blog and a humble astronaut's guide to the stars, whereas this doesn't obviously match what I have. Now, without getting too much into the weeds, we did actually have a file that gave us this. I think it was called site data. Yeah, right here. So this base data, I could import this and have the title and description here. So maybe we should do that. So I'll drop base data in there and hit Control and Spacebar to pull that in, and that should have imported up top. There we go. And here I should be able to just grab the title, and same thing here, we'll just grab the description. And now if I save it, this should be Katie House's portfolio site and her description. Cool. So while we're creating an XML file, the whole point here is that it's dynamically built every time we build this site. It'll fetch the data live and then output it into a static XML file. Now, if you want to, you can actually make this look a little prettier. So this is kind of beyond the scope of the dynamic endpoint. But just a note, let's see, if I come down this way, so if I come over here and grab this style sheet, what we're going to do is add this right here. Now this will look for this underneath my public folder in RSS styles.xsl. You can customize this however you want, but since I don't want to have to write custom XSL, I'm just going to open up this prettier v3 default, and I'm just going to copy all of this. Now let's go backwards. We need to put it in RSS/styles. That's in our public directory. So if I come back over here, and we'll go inside of our public directory and just create a new folder called RSS, and then we'll create a new file called styles.xsl. And I'll simply paste all that in. The RSS helper will then point the style sheet right here. So if I come back over here and refresh, it'll now look a lot better than it did otherwise. Now you'll notice here it includes the title, but it doesn't include things like my description. So what I might want to do is copy this down, and I should be able to just update this to say description, and then come over here, and that should pull that in as well. Now, if you want to do more with XSL, go ask somebody else because I don't really understand it, but this gives you enough to at least get something that looks halfway decent. Usually people are using RSS readers anyhow that pull in this content, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about how this is styled, but sometimes people will click on a link that you have on your site. Obviously, you would need to link this up somewhere so that people could actually access it, but if they do click on it, you might want it to look at least this good. Now, just a couple other notes. There are some other things you may want to do. For instance, you may actually want the full content of your posts right here, and you can do that with this content property. You just want to make sure you sanitize it. You have to parse it. You have to render it. So I'll leave that to you if you're interested in doing something like that. And then another thing you'll probably want to do is to make sure it can be discovered automatically. You do that with a link tag in the head of the document. That way, if somebody points their RSS reader to anywhere on your site, it should have access to this link, which will tell it, hey, here's where my RSS feed is. So maybe let's do that quickly, even though that's kind of beyond the scope of what we're looking to do. So I'm going to come over here to the base head. We'll simply add that in. Let's do it right here. This should point to whatever my end site is /RSS XML. And then I might want to update this as well. We could use that same base data, and we'll just do .title. Now, if any RSS feed points to anywhere on my site, it should be able to recognize this and point my RSS reader to that RSS XML page. Of course, you could also include a link like in the footer of the site. So if I come back over here, maybe you'd have something down here as well that said like RSS, and you could click on that and actually point that to your RSS reader as well. But again, beyond the scope of what we're trying to do, I just want to show you one more use case for why you'd want to have some kind of dynamic endpoint that's a static file, in this case, XML. We set up now 2 different dynamic endpoints. One was just a JSON file that queried all of our content collections on build, and then built a static JSON file. In this lesson, we set up an XML file, so it's an RSS feed, and again, it dynamically grabs all of our content from our content collections that we want, and puts it in an RSS feed so that readers can crawl that, and every time you update something on your site and rebuild, it will update that RSS feed automatically and push that out to all the RSS readers. Both of these, however, have only been using get endpoints because we're using a static site generation mode. Even in this project where we happen to be using a hybrid mode, we've not set the individual route to be dynamic. It's still just pre-rendered. In the next lesson, we're going to look at using these dynamic endpoints for full API routes, which means the file itself needs to be server-side rendered. Once you do that, you open yourself up to post requests, delete requests, patch requests, all the other ones. So we can basically build a full CRUD app. We can do that, a very simple one, albeit, using dynamic API endpoints in SSR mode. So far, we've looked at 2 great examples in SSG mode where you're building some kind of dynamic endpoint. Now, they've both been GET requests because that's all you can do in static site generation mode. We're going to spend one more lesson here in static site generation mode. Then I'll show you a lot of the cool stuff you get if you switch over to SSR. So what I want to talk about in this lesson is dynamic routing for these dynamic endpoints. Now here I just ran the Astro CLI command to create a new project and chose the blog template. I've done nothing else to it. You can see over here though that we've got some dynamic routing already happening. If I come over here into the pages and into the blog, this is what I'm talking about right here, where we've got this slug. It's actually nested dynamic route, but you can see how it's generating the paths we need based on our collection. We can do the same thing when it comes to our endpoints. So let's jump into the pages directory. I'm going to create an API folder, and then to start with, let's refresh what we've already looked at. So we'll do something like getposts.json.ts. And then in a moment here, we're going to convert this to a dynamic routing for endpoints as well. For now, let's just start with the basics though, where we have a get function that then returns some kind of response. So new response, and here we'll just json.stringify something. For right now, it won't be anything. Okay, so let's go ahead and pull in, first of all of our content collections. So we're going to say posts equals, and there's probably something like this already on the slug route, right? So let's come in here. Here it is right here. So let's go ahead and grab this right here. That way we're not duplicating too much work here. And I'll just drop this in right here. Control and spacebar should pull in that get collection function. And then down here, I can just return the posts. That means if I were to come over here and I hit this dynamic endpoint API get posts.json, it should give me back all my posts and their content collection stuff. All right, perfect. So that's all working properly. However, you may have noticed that there's just a lot of data in here, right? In fact, it just goes and goes and goes. And I've only got, I think, 5 or 6 posts. It includes all the text from each of the blogs as well, along with all their functions. So there's a lot of stuff that's in here. So it's very possible that if I want to fetch one of these, I don't want to fetch every single one. For most of my use cases, I'm not going to want every single post on my site. I want to pick off a particular one and use it like in a React component, for instance. This is where dynamic routing for these endpoints comes into play. So I'm going to jump over here to the endpoints docs right here. And let's see, let's scroll up right here. You're going to see that what we can do is export a get static paths function that will create these dynamically on the fly. And notice we're using this bracketed syntax. Now, we don't have nested dynamic routes here, so that's why it's not like the ... ID, it's just ID. So in this case, what I'm going to do is come over this way, and we'll name it the same thing. We'll just name it ID, and that's because we're going to use the ID of the post to then generate all these files. That means when we build, we won't have a single route at API/getPost.json or whatever it was. We'll have multiple routes at API/ and then the name of the actual post. That means we can hit that route to grab just that post's information. Now, you may actually want to have something like this that has like all posts or something, and that might be a route. But for the dynamic ones, we'd want something that's bracketed. And that way, again, we can pick off individual ones. Now, notice here what they're doing is they're picking off the ID from the params that have been passed in. And the params is just part of the actual URL. This is the same way it works in dynamic page routing. So let's go ahead and come in here, and let's first of all pick off that params ID property. So we'll just say params.id. Now, just to make sure we can see what's going on here, let's console log this, and this should show up on the server right over here, right? So if I hit this, it tells us we need to get static paths function, which we already know that, but I thought it might console log it first. It doesn't. Okay, that's fine. Well, let's first of all then go ahead and fix this, and then we'll also see how we're getting in this params ID. So if I come back over this way, you're going to notice what we do is we have to return here individual ones per static path. So we'll just export a function here called get static paths. And here what I want to do is grab all my posts down this way. That means this needs to be an async function. And here I just want to return looping through all of these. We'll return these posts. And in fact, don't we have something like this over here? Yeah, we do. Okay, so let's go ahead and grab this right here, and I'll just drop this in right here. Now, one thing to note is that we cannot have props that are passed along because this is a function, all right? So it's a function, not a component, so props are not supported. Now, before we had that as slug, here we've named it ID, so that means that this needs to be ID as well. That means it's going to build all these, and at this get endpoint, what I can do is pick off the individual ID and then pass that along. So it will use this to build the routes. Then when it hits this route, what I want to do is pick off the individual one. So let's just call it like post equals await. We'll do get entry. And here, this is my blog. And then I'm just going to pass in the ID. Whatever the thing is that I've got should be the same as this actual entry, right? Now, it doesn't yet know what this type is, but let's not worry about that for now. What I'm going to do is just pass back the post itself based on whatever I got back here. So now what I need to do is come back over this way. And now I need to not just do get post, I need to actually pass in the slug or the ID of an individual post. So let's come back over this way and let's just find one of these posts. So this will be content, blog, and then first post. That'll work. So if I say first post.json, you see I get just that first post back. Now let's fix a little bit of this TypeScript problem. You can see here it doesn't know what this is because it could be anything. So if I type in something that doesn't exist, then obviously that's going to give me a 404. Because static site generation mode is going to take care of that 404 for us, what I can do is perhaps just come in here and do a collection entry here and say that this is my type of blog. And then you can pick off an individual property. In this case, I'm picking off the ID. So I'm saying this is of this type, and that way this stops getting angry. Now, obviously, it doesn't necessarily have to be. It may not be that exact type, but right now I'm just going to leave it how it is. Now, obviously, in this case, I could pass along something that's not the ID, but at least it makes TypeScript happy for now, and I'm already going to get the 404, which is all I would do anyhow if it wasn't the exact ID that I needed that would actually show an entry. So how does this actually work on build? So let's shut this down here. We'll just do npm run build, just to show you what this is going to do when it actually builds the site. Okay, perfect. So let's come back over here, and let's look at the dist folder that has been outputted. I've got an API route with a bunch of static JSON files, but notice it's for each of my posts. Again, you may want to have one that's like all posts or something like that, in which case it would not use the slug. It would first look for an actual string of all posts.json. If it can't find that, then it would look at the slug. So if you had an all post, you could just do that and return a single get that has all your posts in it if you ever needed that for some instance. So while you may not use this dynamic routing for these endpoints all the time, it's a really nice tool to have in your bag when you need it. And if you know it exists, you'll find little use cases where this is really, really helpful. Now, all this stuff so far has been fine and good, but really where this gets powerful is when you add in an SSR adapter. That's when you get full API functionality. In the next lesson, we're going to start in baby steps and just look at the get endpoint in SSR mode and some additional features you get along with it. We're continuing with the same code we had in the last lesson, except now what I want to do is open up my Astro config. We're going to add an SSR adapter. Now we can add whatever one we want. In this case, let's just do something real simple. I'm going to do npx astro add, and we'll just add the node adapter. Again, these adapters allow for server-side rendering mode. So yes, I'll let it install that. And yes, it can update my config. And then I'll just do npm run dev to get this thing back up and running. All right, so you see it's added everything right here. So all this entire site now is server-side rendered. Now, typically what I like to do is start with hybrid mode, which like I've mentioned in the past, allows everything to be statically generated unless we want to dynamically generate some kind of endpoint. So if I do this, now everything will be statically generated just like before, but I've got the option on any individual route to make it server-side rendered, including these API routes. So now that I've got that, let's come back over this way. And what I want to do is get rid of this export static paths function. I don't have to do this anymore because we can just do this dynamically as somebody hits this endpoint. Again, because this is going to be server-side rendered, every single time we hit this endpoint, it can then do logic and return to us the file we need. In order to make this individual route server-side rendered, I need to export a const called pre-render, and we'll set this to false. So we do not want this particular route pre-rendered. Again, the reason we have to do this is because we set it in hybrid mode, which means by default everything is static site generated unless we have this declaration up top. Now this will be a dynamic server-side rendered API route. Now here's the cool thing. I can just get rid of this altogether, right? I don't need that anymore. And it can just pick this off the param as we hit the endpoint. It will then locate it and then return it to us. Now we are going to notice a little problem here in a moment, but if I come over here, we do API, and then we did like what, first post.json I think it was. Notice it just figures this out, right? It just says, hey, do I have anything like this? Yeah, I do. Great. I return it. All right. So now if I add something that doesn't exist, you're going to notice it has an error, but it doesn't know what to do. It doesn't redirect. It just doesn't give us anything back. So we do need to actually make sure that this post exists based on this ID. So what I can do here is just say if no post, all right, if that doesn't exist, we can return a redirect. Now this is another option you get inside of here. So redirect like this. And in server-side mode, you can just redirect. And here I might do something like 404. And if I come back over here, you'll notice it now returns it to 404. Now you might want to return some kind of custom endpoint instead, or make them go to the home page. You can actually optionally also pass along like a 307 or something like that, where you're actually sending them and saying, hey, this doesn't exist, right? So if I come over here again and we try to do a fake post now, it should actually send us to the 404. Perfect. However, if I hit any of the other endpoints, so let's find another one here, like second post. How creative. Let's do second post. And now you'll see it gives me second post. So server-side render allows for logic. When you hit this, you just have to make sure you return a redirect if it doesn't match your logic. So that's dynamic routing in SSR mode. So it's just way more simplified, right? Now, let's also think about other things we may want to do. So let's come over here. We'll do like get posts.json. So this is not dynamic anymore based on the slug. It's simply always going to be get posts. And we should return something from here. Now, there's a few things I want to point out. First of all, this is an actual API route. In other words, it's going to be hit and generate all the stuff we need live on demand. Now, this is truly server-side because it can actually do logic there. That means we can have things like environmental variables here that are protected. And again, it's just going to return information to us. We don't have to worry about our API keys being exposed or anything like that because this will all be done on the server. So right now what I want to do is just comment all this out. And let's just return a new response just to get this to stop being angry with us. New response. And we'll just JSON.stringify like nothing for now. Okay, so if I come over here and now we've called this what? Get posts like that, it should just return to us this empty object. Now we've looked at one way to be dynamic in these, and that is to have the dynamic route parameter, but you can also do things now in server-side rendered mode where you actually have some kind of query param. So let's say in this case I had an ID, and this ID was first post. This is another way to do the exact same thing. First thing I want to do is come over here. We're just going to pick off this ID. So first of all, let's go ahead and grab a new URL. We'll just pass in the request.url. Now I'll call this URL. And then let's come down here and we're going to call this ID and simply grab the url.searchparams.get and we'll just get the ID search param. So this may or may not exist. In this case, it obviously does right over here. So if I refresh this page and open the server-side logs, you'll see here we get first post as our ID. So we can actually pick this off individually and now say, hey, if this exists, go ahead and give me a single post. Otherwise, go ahead and give me all the posts, right? So we can be a little bit more dynamic and have essentially a route that can handle a query param that then can determine how it's going to return to us. So let's come down here and just say if ID, then we're going to do all this logic right here. So let's come in here and uncomment this out. So if we pass in something that has a query param that its ID matches an actual blog post, it will then return that to us down here. Otherwise, we'll get a 404. So if I come over here and refresh, now we get this right here, right? So if I come over here and we do second post, it should give us the second post. What will happen if I do something that doesn't exist? Well, you guessed it, it's going to hit this right here. Now, what happens if I come over here and I just don't have a query param at all here? What should I get back? Think about it before I hit enter. There we go. We're just getting this right here because, of course, it doesn't have an ID, so it's not going to hit all this logic right here. So what we can do is say, hey, if there is no query param, instead of returning this to us, let's go ahead and come down here, and let's just go ahead and grab all the posts. Maybe let's call this all posts equals await, get collection, and we're going to get all our blog posts. Then down here, I can just say return to me all my posts, right? So now if I come over here and refresh, we'll now get all the posts. And if I have some kind of query param right here, like ID first post, and now it gives us back just the first post. So that's another option you get now on server-side rendered mode because it's actually doing this logic live. Now, of course, we don't have to just do things that are local to our site. One of the cool things about true API routes is when I hit this, I can then go out and grab the data I need, and I can even do this securely like we mentioned. So I'm going to come over here to JSON placeholder, and just as a sample kind of fake REST API. Let's come down this way and let's look at some different routes. So you'll see here we get the same kind of thing, right? So we can get posts, we can get like an individual post there, we can get its comments, we can even use this query param kind of ID, right? And here you'll notice it gives us a few other options too, like you can use the comments connected to this post, all right? So we've got a bunch of different options, and eventually we're gonna look at these other endpoints as well. How do we hit this? Well, if I come back up this way, I think they give this to us. Yeah, so you just grab an individual post by hitting this route. So by keeping all the logic here in our API route, what we can do is not only keep all of our logic together and then call this from wherever we need to in our app, but in addition to that, we can actually have env variables that we then call along with this. Now, in this case, there's no like required authentication, but you may have that as a response. So let's come over here and I'm going to get rid of all this right here. And I'm just going to comment it out so that if you ever want to look at that, you've got it for you. What I need to do now is inside here, let's do like a little try catch. And we're just going to say const request equals await. And let's just go ahead and fetch all this, except instead of to-dos, I think it was posts, right? So we've got these posts that we should get back. Let's just do a quick check like you should do here on request.ok. If it's not okay, then we can simply throw a new error. We'll say like there was a problem fetching your posts. Okay, and then assuming it was okay, we should get something back, right? So we'll say const res equals await rec.json. So just normal JavaScript stuff here, but we should actually get this back. This is now what we want to return on the endpoint. So let's just return a new response where we'll json.stringify this, right? Whatever the request is that we get back. Now, if this isn't the case, in other words, if there's an error anywhere in this chain, what we want to do is then throw this error and return that instead. So let's return a new response, and this will just be json.stringify. And for right now, we'll just return the error, everything that comes back. And I guess if we wanted to, we could also have like a server log here that would be logging whatever the error is. Let's call it console.error. How about that? Okay, so let's now actually hit this endpoint, and now we're actually reaching out to an actual service, right? And hitting that. So let's get rid of this query param right now. We don't need that. You'll notice here that we get back all these posts, right? Now we could do the same kind of logic we just did up top here, where we actually figure out if there's an ID that we get back, and if there is, we can then hit like an individual post. So like, let's say we came in here and we had our ID right here. So what I could do is come in here, we could say ID equals 1, and it should just get us the very first post. Now, of course, you'd want to do the same kind of thing where you have an if check in there as well, but just to mention that you could do that. Like I mentioned, though, the real power here is that we actually have a server-side protected route where we can do other things as well. So for instance, in this GET request, and maybe that the service I'm connecting to, I have to pass along some kind of auth token. Well, now I can come inside here, we can have headers, and if I have something like authorization, and maybe I have a bearer token, I can say bearer, and then pass along whatever my token happens to be. This will all be protected server-side and happen live when somebody hits this route. Now let's talk for just a second about env variables. Typically you want to protect these inside of a .env file, and this is where you'd put anything you want to be protected, right? And you'll notice that by default, it's actually added to the git ignore right here. So that way, if you add something, it won't be committed to your Git repository and it keeps it safe for you. So let's say we had something like API key, and this was like 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, Astro uses Vite under the hood. And so if I come back over here, the way we actually get this in here is by using its import.meta. So import.meta.env, and then whatever the name of the key is. So .api key like this. So just to make sure we actually see what's going on here, maybe I should extract this out. Up here, we'll say const key equals all that. And then I can get rid of all this right here and just drop inside here the key that I get back. Now, just to make sure we're actually getting something, let's console log this. And if I hit this route again, you'll notice in the server-side logs, I actually get key 1, 2, 3, 4. Now, one cool feature about how Vite does these env variables and how Astro has interacted with it is you cannot access this API key anywhere on a client-side route. That way, it kind of protects it by default. If you want this to be available client-side, you have to use the public underscore API key. Then you can access it in client-side code. So that's just one little extra way that it protects you. So you can see how what we can do is actually pass along some kind of authenticated key here that's protected server-side and then returns to us our request. That means I can hit this route unauthenticated from the front end or wherever I need to, but it actually does a lot of that logic right here. And again, it's all protected. You can see the extra power you get in server-side rendered mode. And again, because Astro has this hybrid mode right here, you can keep everything on your site statically generated and just have some dynamic API routes that then can get and fetch information live as they are hit. Now, of course, if your build depends on these, then at build time, those static files are going to be rendered based on whatever your API route said at that time. But if you're using this for some kind of external service, or perhaps with some kind of front-end framework like React or Svelte, you can actually fetch these dynamic endpoints live and then render that on your page using client-side JavaScript. In the next lesson, we're going to look at the other methods available like post and put and delete and patch and all those because, again, this is server-side rendered. We can actually do logic live. So we get all those methods now open to us in server-side rendered mode. All right, are you ready to build full server endpoints? That's what we can do in SSR mode with these API routes, which again are just called on the server live when somebody hits the route. And that way we can do a bunch of different methods. Not just get methods, but we can also do post and put and all of the other ones as well. First of all, before we do too much more, I do want to mention that there are other files you can generate as well. So for instance, you can grab something like this And let's just replace this here. You'll notice what we're doing is we're actually fetching an image from a URL, and then we're returning that as the content type of image. And you can do this here in SSR mode. And if I come over here and refresh, you'll notice we actually get this image pulled in right here. So there are other things you can do as well. If you have some great use cases for that, let me know, but just figured I would mention that to you. Generally speaking though, I'm going to use these primarily as like a traditional API route. So we've got a bunch of different methods available to us. And again, because we're working in SSR mode, now all these are available to us live when we hit whatever route we're hitting. So what I'm going to do is just come over here and we're just going to change the name of this to like methods or something like that. That way we can use different methods here. And of course we don't have to rename it. It's just helpful. If it says get posts and I'm doing a post request, then it just feels a little weird. So here's our get one. We already know that. We've got that ready here. We can also do post requests though. So let's just grab this right here and let's come over here. And now if I hit this with a post request, we should get this back. So this route right here, except this needs to be called methods now, should get us this on a get request. However, if I hit this with a post request, I should get back an actual post message, which is this right here. So I've just got an HTTP request like curl thing that we can do quickly here just to show you how this works. This is like a little postman inside of Raycast. So here, let's do something like name, and we'll do Chris. And I'll make the request, and you see we get back, this was a post request. So with a GET request, like we're hitting over here, we get back all this data. With the POST request, it knows, hey, this is the method I'm getting. I can now post. Now, there is actually a way to use the JSON placeholder API to kind of mimic this if you want to. You can see here we can actually post, and you just hit the post route. And if I jump into this guide, you'll see some examples. So that's getting, that's listing. We've already done those kinds of things. Now we can create a resource as well. So what I can do is let's just copy a lot of this same logic right here with this try catch. And I'm going to dump this in down this way. Now this needs to be an async function, so I can await in here, and we're good there. And then let me go ahead and just grab all this, and we'll pass this on as the fetch. And that will be what, right here? Again, if you had some kind of key to pass along, this would be the time to do it. I don't, so let's get rid of that. And then it should give me back all this output right here in this response. So this is what we should see in our console log whenever we hit this route. Now, instead of hard coding this value here, because that's not super useful, right? Every time I posted this, it just automatically starts the exact same thing. What I want to do is pass along something, right? With a title, a body, a user ID, all that kind of stuff. And I want that to then be used to send this to the database or whatever it happens to be. So what I'm going to do is come up top here, and I'm going to try something else. So I'm going to call this data, and I'm just going to get this from the request.json. Now, I actually do need to await this as well because it needs to actually do this work. And then I should get this back, and I can pass this along as the data right here. And then it should return to me something like this, an ID of 101, and then whatever title I pass in, the body and the user ID. So let me open back up my HTTP request. All right, I'm going to go ahead and come in here and make a post request, and we'll do it to our methods.json file. And then I'll come down here. We're just going to pass in an object here, and this will have things like a title. And we'll just say like new post or something like this. Because this does need to be JSON, you can see I've got to have this in quotes for all this. We'll have a body that'll say like post body. And then finally a user ID that will say like 1 or something. Okay, so let's go ahead and make the request. This posts, and you'll notice that we get back a response from the JSON server. And it actually says, hey, you created a new post, and we see all this custom data we passed along. So pretty cool to do post requests right here. Now, obviously, you wouldn't necessarily just have to use like Postman or something like that. You'd be maybe sending along some form data to your database. Now, you could do little checks in here as well. So for instance, I could come in here and say like if data.title, if there is no data.title, then I can just return some kind of error. So let's come back over here. I think they had an example here. Maybe it was under this API forms actually. Yeah, right here. So you can see how if this doesn't exist, then just return something like this, right? So you didn't pass along the required fields. So that means if I come back down this way and we don't include that, but I don't actually include a title, I should get back a problem, right? And I do right here. And you can see how this particular extension just gives me the status. It doesn't give me the message. But if I come in here and I add a title that says something like that, and then I make the request, I should get this back, and it actually does work properly. So you might want to do some checks like this if you're passing in some kind of form data and you grab this off the actual body that's passed in. Now we've looked at post. There's other options we've got available in this JSON placeholder that we can use as an example. So we can update something as well if we want to. Now I'm going to go ahead and do a put request to the same endpoint. And here we'll then do a put request after we hit that to the JSON placeholder. So let's come down here and let's change this to put. Now here I probably am not going to have this title check. I just want to make sure that it has something that I get back. And you'd probably want to have some kind of checks to make sure that it corresponds to the data you have. But then what I can do is I can hit a dynamic endpoint here. remember, we can grab this in a couple different ways. For instance, we can come in here and say URL equals new URL, and we can just grab this from the request.url, and then we can grab an ID off of the URL.searchparams.get, and then we'll just get the ID. Right? So if we pass in some kind of ID, that's when we'd want this. If there's no ID, then we might want to return some kind of 404, right? Like you have to have an ID to actually update something, right? So this would be the post ID we want to update. Assuming we've got this on the search param, that we can then run a put request to JSON placeholder. And in here, we would just want to have our dynamic ID, right? So this thing right here, we're going to post to this and update this right here, or put to that and update that right there. So we'll come in here with put, and then everything else should work properly for us. All the same logic works. If there's a problem, it should fire this error down this way. So let's see if we did this correctly. Again, I'm going to come over here. We're just going to do a put in this case. So I'll hit my methods, and then down this way, all we're going to do is make sure that we pass in an object, and it should have like a title. We'll say like new title. But remember, we're going to get an error if I go ahead and make this request. So if I try to make this request, you'll see it doesn't work. Now, why is that? Well, you might remember we have to have some kind of query param on here to actually hit that individual route. So let's come back in here. We're going to have an ID of 1. Now I should be able to come down here, and I should be able to pass along just something like a title. So title, we'll say like new title. Now when I make this, you'll see I get back a response that says, hey, here's the updated value for that entry. Now we can do the exact same thing, obviously, with the delete as well. So let's do that quickly as well. So let's come down here. We'll just move this down this way. And now we can do a delete route as well. Same exact thing. In this case, we'd want to grab an ID. And if it doesn't have an ID, we can hit that. That's fine. In this case, all we need to do is change this to delete. We don't need to pass along any data at all. None of this matters because all it's going to do is hit that endpoint and delete it. Here's a patch as well if we wanted to do that. But you can see I just have to pass along an actual link to a resource. The idea here is on like a database with this method of delete, and it should work for me. So again, I'm going to come in here and make this request. This would be delete, and we're going to use an ID of 1. And that's all we have to pass along. And it should get back a response that says, hey, we're good to go. Status 200, that means it worked. So whether you're using Postman or doing this client side, or like here I'm doing it in Raycast, just trying to show how you can hit these different methods, these different endpoints. Now, if you want to, you can actually have it like kind of a catch-all as well. So they give an example right here where you can actually pick off the request.method, and then inside like one big function right here, you can then decide what to do. I prefer to just split them up because it makes more sense logically. And you can even obviously have these as different routes as well, like delete post could be its own route that looks just like this delete function. Post, same thing, right? Et cetera, et cetera. So true API routes that are hit server side, and then the logic is performed. That means Astro can do full CRUD operations. In the next lesson, that's exactly what I want to do. Now, there are a couple other things you may want to pay attention to here, like the request object you get in SSR mode has a bunch more stuff on it, like content type application JSON. You can check off of that. You can also redirect as well. So like, let's say you delete something and then you want to redirect them. That would be a great use case right here. Assuming that you get back a positive response, you might want to then use that same redirect function and redirect them to your homepage or to like a new post page or something like that. So again, you can do logic inside of these routes since they're server-side rendered. Lots of really cool applications are now open to us with server-side rendered mode. In the next lesson, what I want to do is build out a full sample project. This will be a simple app where we can store dev links that we want to interact with in some kind of custom database. We'll use things like deleting and posting and getting all those, and we'll be able to do all this live using these server endpoints. Let's get started with an actual real-life project, and I've included all the code you need to get started in the lesson description. You can see here that once you download it and open it in something like VS Code, you will go ahead and need to npm install it. So I'm going to open this up and just say npm install, or npm I works as well, and it should install everything we need. In this lesson, we're going to keep using JSON Server just to keep things simple. And then in the next module, we'll actually attach Astro DB, which is a whole database solution that's in early preview as I record this for Astro. And there's lots of really cool things you can do here. But the important thing to note is that we'll eventually put this up into production using Astro DB. Okay, but for now, like I mentioned, we're using JSON Server. So let's go ahead and npm install. And we're just going to use JSON Server like this. Now, we've used this in the past, and you might remember that we're going to have a DB file at the root of the entire file system. So let's go ahead and open up over here, and I'm going to add a db.json file. And right now, this will just be an object, and then we'll have a key here of links. And for right now, this is going to point to an empty array. Now we need to get this actually up and running. So let me open up our package.json, and we can do this a couple different ways, but let's go ahead and just add an actual script so we don't have to remember how to do this. And here, this will simply be JSON server and then db.json. You used to pass a watch flag, but I don't think you actually have to do that anymore. So now I should be able to come over here and just do npm run dev, and that will get our site up and running. And if I come over here, let's open another tab. I should be able to come in here and say npm run server. So if we did this correctly, we should have this at localhost 3000 links. So let me open this over this way, and then our other server should be open over here. Well, the actual site open over here, dev links like this. Okay, so that's all we're going to do in this lesson. However, I've got a bunch of stuff going on here. So if you're interested in how I set up the CSS and everything, go ahead and stick around. I'll walk you through it, but it's not necessary for the actual lesson that we're going to be doing. Okay, so for those of you who are interested in how I set all this up, there's a couple things to note. I do use Tailwind in this project. We're using Astro Icon. I'm also using something called Class Variance Authority, which I've done a video for free on my channel before. I really like it because it helps you especially work with Tailwind in a way that you can pass in like a variance type for a button, for instance, and then pick off of the different options you have available, and everything kind of just stays really nice and organized. We're also using JSON Server. That's what we just installed. We will sanitize inputs with sanitized HTML. This will allow us to do things like make sure that if people enter some kind of script tag that could be malicious, we can strip that out before anything bad happens. I'm also using Tailwind to merge. This allows you to merge Tailwind classes, and it actually intelligently takes the last one you pass into this function and lets that override previous ones. And then finally, like I said, Tailwind and TypeScript. So that's kind of the stack we're using here. If I were to open it up over this way, everything starts in the pages directory. And you can see right over here, we don't have a whole lot going on, just some Tailwind classes. And of course, there are other ways to do this as well, but just keeping it real simple right now. Now, everything will actually be on this page, but we're going to have a few components that end up showing here. The first thing we're going to do eventually is show everything in a link card. This link card component eventually is going to show an article right here that will have a checkbox. This is a custom checkbox component. We'll also have our heading right here of whatever the title happens to be, the paragraph. And then I also have a custom link component. And finally, I have a custom button component. This one right now is just an icon that will show trash, and we'll look at all this in a moment. So what we're going to actually use this data delete, this data ID, when we're selecting this to decide whether or not to delete it. And then each of these kind of have their own custom settings. So this custom checkbox right here, you can see that I've got an input that's going to be hidden actually. You can see here, right here, it's got opacity 0, but I'm using it to control the actual functionality, which would be right over here. This fake checkbox that will then show as checked or not checked, depending on whether or not it is read. The label then points to this same ID, and that way they correspond with each other. So if you click the label, it will actually check the input. So just normal HTML stuff at this point. We're going to do some more JavaScript stuff down here below in a little bit, but we've looked at the checkbox. The link uses that class variance authority. You can see right here. And what it's doing is it's giving all these as the default classes. Again, I've done a video on this on my channel if you're interested more in how I set this up. And then we've got a primary option, we've got an accent option, and then we've got different sizes as well. Now, this is all type safe as well. You can see that I'm extending some props. I'm actually using the HTML attributes helper from Astro as well. And then in the end, I'm spreading it all in here, requiring that they do pass in an href. For the button, let's come in here. Same kind of thing. We're using CVA. That's that class variance authority. And if I come over here, we've got the same thing. We've got a primary, we've got an accent button, then we've got different sizes as well. I don't remember which one I ended up actually using in the project, but I think I copied this over from a previous project I've been working on. You can see this Tailwind merge takes in kind of the default stuff and then it adds in these extra things. You can even override them with your own classes afterwards if you want to spread custom classes in as well. So just some examples of a little bit more robust components than what we've currently been building. Now, like I mentioned, I'm using Astro Icon, and here I'm using a trash icon. Let's see, I think I've got just a few, the trash and the check, and both of those are being minified by Astro Icon. A couple other small things to note. I do have a layout, and this kind of wraps everything. You'll notice that this is what we've got going on right here. So we've got the header that says dev links. We've got a button that's right here, and you can see that intent and use. So if I came over here, and instead of accent, I used primary, you'll see that it changes colors to that white. And that allows you to kind of keep a theming system set up and ready. And when you're actually using it, it's just as simple as declaring an intent. Over here, we've got just the main class with a slot. This is where all the body of our document will go. This is a single page site, so not a whole lot going on here. I've obviously got a footer as well. And that's pretty basic right here. You can see I'm just showing the copyright year, and that's about it. Now, really where a lot of the magic happens is in this dialog component. You'll notice that it's a standard HTML dialog component, and this is now pretty much available anywhere you need it in browsers. We've got some custom text input and text area components that essentially do some of the styling and allow me to just pass in the exact things I need, like a pattern, for instance, so that it has to start with HTTPS. So that's one option. And then I've also got a checkbox as well that uses the same kind of functionality we looked at a moment ago on the actual cards. Got a couple buttons as well, one primary and one accent. And then finally, all this is opened and closed just using the normal stuff you would expect. So I've actually got an open dialog button that when it's clicked, you'll see that I show the modal. This is a method that comes along with that HTML dialog element, which is really, really nice. So you don't have to write a bunch of stuff yourself. Now, once it's open, we've got a few ways to close it. First, I can close it using a button inside of that modal. But secondly, I can actually say, hey, if I've clicked on the dialog, that would be not the actual div where all the stuff is. So if I click here, not this, but anything out here, go ahead and just close it. Now the e.target is the thing that's clicked, and the e.current target is the thing it's set against. In this case, that would be the dialog. So if I click and the thing I clicked is the dialog, then go ahead and close it as well. So you can see now I can come over here. The other cool thing is with the dialog element, if you hit the escape key, you automatically get this refocus on the button that opened it. This is all by default. Don't have to do any work for that. And then here are the two different buttons we have. Here are custom inputs. Here's our custom text area and our custom checkbox as well. Okay, so that's kind of the setup of how it all works. Again, I didn't want to build all that out because that's not really the point of this lesson, but I do this kind of stuff a lot of times for free on my channel anyhow. So if you're interested more in how I build out components and sites, obviously give me a follow over there. And I'm assuming you have if you've got this course. Okay, in the next lesson, we're going to actually get into building this. We're going to start with adding entries. So what happens when we come over here and we click and enter in all this stuff and click add link. From the last lesson, you should have this up right here at 3,000 links, and that will allow us to interact with our fake database. And then you should also have 4321, which is the actual site. Now, one thing we want to do is make sure that everything is going to be server-side rendered. So if I come over here right now, let's see, not in here, the Astro config, you'll notice that right now it's not being server-side rendered. Now, where you want to do this is kind of up to you. For me, I'm going to put this up at Netlify. So that means I want to install one more package, which would be npx astro add netlify. Now, what this will do is allow for server-side rendering. We've done this a couple of other times. You can use for cell or node adapter or whatever other SSR adapter you want. Again, I'm just going to click yes to all these, and it should get everything up and running. Go ahead and do npm run dev. Now, a lot of times I've switched this over to hybrid mode, but in this case, I actually want this to be server-side rendered. Every time somebody hits this site, I want it to actually render this page live using the server code. And that way, as I add links, I don't have to rebuild the site every time because that kind of defeats the purpose. Okay, so now that we've got that going, what I want to do is come over here and we're going to create another directory here. We're just going to call it API. Now, this first lesson, what we're going to do is set up a post endpoint where we can actually add links, and inside here, those links will then be added to our database. So this is something you should be able to do yourself after the stuff we've talked over. Let me go ahead and get you started, and then I would encourage you to pause the video and try it yourself. We're just going to call this addLink.json.ts. You can also use JavaScript if you want. This will be where we actually do all the server-side adding of this. Now, where the actual functionality will happen is going to be in our components folder and inside UI, and we're going to come into the dialog component. So these are the two files we're going to interact with. Whenever this form is submitted, this add form ID, we've already got it right here. All I'm going to do is do an event listener on that then hits my API endpoint at addLink.json. It needs to be a post request, and then that post request will then send a subsequent post request to our actual database, which would be right here. Okay, hopefully that makes sense what we're doing, and I'm going to let you go ahead and try it yourself, and then you can play the video when you're ready. Okay, so hopefully you had a good go of that. Let's come over here. I will create a new constant called post, and this needs to be all caps. Because I'm using TypeScript, I'm going to use the API route helper, and we'll need to do asynchronous work here, so I need to make sure I mark this as async. Now let's go ahead and pull in the params, because we're going to use that. Actually, I guess we'd use the request, right? To actually take off whatever data we passed in. Now, right down here, eventually we're going to have to return some kind of response. So let's go ahead and do something just so it doesn't yell at us anymore. So let's return a new response. And this will just be JSON.stringify. And right now we'll stringify nothing. And now at least it's fine. Okay, good. So the first thing I want to do is be able to hit this endpoint and extract off of it the body. So the body of the request should include all the data I need. So let's come over here. We're just going to say const. And maybe let's just call this body. We'll do this will be from await request. Now this should actually just give me all the data I pass along from my form. So right now, let's come back over this way now. I do have the add form selected up here. So let's go ahead and come down here. And we're going to add this add form.add event listener. We're just going to listen for a submit event. Now with forms, you can listen for each individual button, or if you listen for the submit event, that will handle both buttons that are clicked and also the actual submit of the form itself. So like if I hit enter or something like that with my keyboard. Now inside here, let's go ahead and grab the event itself because we want to prevent the default, right? Because the default for forms is to refresh the actual page, to submit to that page. So I want to stop that. And then what we want to do instead is grab the form data and send that along to our API request. So I'm going to go ahead and come in here and do a try catch, and we'll catch any errors down here. And the first thing I want to do is grab all the form data. Now you can do this in a couple different ways. If you want to loop through and grab each of the individual items, you're welcome to do that. But there's a form data API that comes with JavaScript that we've used a couple of times. So let's go ahead and do that. I'm going to grab my new form data. We'll just pass it the entire form, right? So I can just do add form because that's what we called it up here. I could also do like e.currentTarget, I guess, if I wanted to as well. But now that I've got the form data, I need to extract this out in a way that's helpful. So to start with, let's go ahead and just grab like all the data, and we can grab this from object.fromEntries. We'll just pass it the entire form data that we get back. And then let's go ahead now and fetch, right? So we're going to do const, we'll call this a request, and we'll await fetch, and I'm just going to go to my endpoint. That's API/add_link.json. All right, so assuming that I did that correctly, and I do need to come up here and make this async, now whenever I send along data, it should hit my endpoint, and I should actually get this console logging right here where we're getting the body that we sent along. So let's just make sure that's working. Some kind of title, some kind of description, something that starts with HTTPS is read, sure, add link. Okay, so I hit enter. Let's go ahead and check the console down here, and we've got a problem. And maybe you already noticed that because what I have to do is use a post endpoint, right? Because that's the only one I have. So let's come back over here and add one more thing, which is a method of post. So method here would be post. And then I will need some headers because I'm going to actually be sending along JSON, right? So this is just content type like this, and this is called application JSON. Now, finally, I need to pass along the body, right? Because that's the whole thing we're trying to catch in the first place, and this would just simply be JSON.stringify. So once we stringify it, we can just pass along the entire data. This would be whatever we've abstracted out here. Let's see, right here, right from the form data. Okay, so now let's try again. Redo all this. Come in here, add something here, and I'll hit add link. Now over this way, we should have gotten this console logged. Let's check down here, and there we go. So we got my link title, my link description, and my link URL. Now, if you stuck around for the intro, I did mention that we can sanitize this input, and that way we make sure that before stuff even hits our server, that we've stripped out any malicious code. I've included a package, and if you didn't watch the intro where I went through everything, that's just fine, but what we're going to do is just make sure that we use the sanitize HTML package to strip out any bad responses, right? So let's come back over here. And instead of getting these all as just object things and then having to loop through them, let's go ahead and come in here, and I'm just going to grab each of them individually. So now I've got a title, and I can use the sanitize package right here, and it should have imported that. Let's see, it did, kind of in a weird place. I guess let's just put it right there. All right, and these will be like query selectors. All right, and then we'll do dialog events, and then down here we'll do our form events. There we go. Hopefully that's a little bit more organized. So now what I'm going to do is use the sanitize package and just pass it the actual data I'm getting from my form data. So this will be form data.get, and this will be link title. And then for TypeScript, I need to say that this is a string to make sure it knows it's not like, like a picture or an image or file that I've uploaded. So what I'm doing is passing along this form data item, and I'm calling it link title because that's what I've called the individual input. So if I come over here, you're going to see I've got link title right here. And if you were to jump inside here, you'll notice that what I'm doing is I'm lowercasing it and replacing any spaces with these dashes, which means it should be link dash title, and that name is what gets passed along with the form data API. So same thing here for link description and link URL. So let's come back down this way, and let me grab it right here. Okay, so we've got the title there. Next, I want to grab the description, so I should be able to grab this right here, hit Command D, and change this to description. And I have made these required inputs, which means they should have to be there for the form to be submitted. And then finally, I'm going to change this to URL for both of those as well. Now there is one final thing, and that's a checkbox, right? So if I open this up, we've got those three in the checkbox. That may or may not be checked, so I don't want to just pass along true or false. Instead, I want to actually pass along a true Boolean of true or false. So we're going to say const is red. This will be equal to form data, and this may or may not be there, right? So we're going to check if is red is there. If it is there, it will be with the string on. That's how the form data API passes it back. So if it's on, then I want to pass along true. Otherwise, I want to pass along false. And if for some reason that form data isn't there altogether, it should be able to pass along false. So I'll use the nullish coalescing operator, which I'm not totally sure is necessary. It may actually pass along false either way, but now it definitely will if it can't find anything here. Okay, so that should actually work. Now let's come down this way, and we don't have data anymore. Instead, what I want to pass on is the title, the description. I want to pass along the URL, and I want to pass along is red. So let's do the same thing, and we're going to add a link and just make sure that all that worked. So something here, HTTPS, and I can go ahead and add link. Nothing's changing the UI, but if I open up down this way, let's see, here we go. So I'm actually getting all those back, and I actually get a true Boolean right here of true or false. Okay, perfect. So now we're actually getting this to our API that can do all the rest of the work. Now we do need to actually catch errors. So if there are problems, we want to check against those. So let's just do two things. I'm going to console log the error, and then let's also throw up an alert just for kicks. All right, so we're going to say alert, and this will be the e.message. Although this does need to be like as a type of error, otherwise it won't be able to find that with TypeScript. So I'm going to say as long as it's an instance of an error, then go ahead and throw along this alert. Now, just to be safe, we should probably come up here as well and just make sure that we're getting an OK response here. And so I'm going to say if the rec.OK, so if that's not OK, then go ahead and throw a new error. And we'll just say like rec was not OK. All right, otherwise we should get back a response eventually from the server. And I'm going to go ahead and grab that in a constant. And for right now, we're just going to call this res. We'll grab this from await rec.json. So the rec is what we got back up here, and we're just going to JSON the response. And then let's go ahead and console log it right here. Okay, so that's all the work we need to do on the front side for now. We'll come back and close the form out and do a couple other things with the UI. But what I want to do next is now that we're getting this data in here, we're going to do the same kind of song and dance where we make sure that what we're getting is what we expect. So I'm going to come over here. We're going to do a try and a catch as well, or we'll try and then we'll catch the errors. And inside here, what I want to do first of all is just grab all the data. So I should be able to extract out of the body my title, my description, my URL, and my isRead, right? That's what we just passed along, and we'll just grab this all destructured from the data. Now, once I have this, or what do we call that, body? So now that we've got all those, let's make sure that they're the type we expect. So I could do this in a couple of different ways, but for instance, I could say type of title. If it doesn't equal string, then I want to throw an error, right? Let's grab all this again, and we'll do the same thing here, except type of description, right? And we'll also check to make sure the type of URL is the same. Now, we need to change this up slightly for the isRead, right? So isRead, this will just be Boolean. So I should be getting 3 strings and 1 Boolean. That's what I'm expecting. And assuming that that is the case, then I can go ahead and do stuff. But here I'm saying if it's not the case, I want to go ahead and throw in an error. So let's just throw a new error, or we'll say, please provide all required fields. Now we need to actually catch the error somewhere. So let's come down here and catch that. And the first thing I'll do is console the error on the server. And then let's just return a new response. This will be json.stringify. We're just going to stringify a few things. First of all, I want to pass along the message. This will be whatever I sent along this way. So this should be the e.message. That comes along with the actual error that's been thrown. Now, once again, like before, we need to come in here and check that this is an instance of an error. So assuming that is the case, TypeScript will now be happy for me to throw this or to return this response. So there we go. So we're going to return this response here where we send along the message. Now I'm also going to have a success property that we're going to set to false just to say it did not properly do this. And then finally, I can send along a status. Maybe we just do something like 404. Now, obviously, you'd want to handle this a little bit more robustly if you were building this out fully, but this will do for a basic site. Okay, cool. Now, if this is not an instance of error, I guess we should probably also have something we return. So let's come down this way and copy this down. And here we're just going to say there was an unknown error. Okay, so we've got 2 possible ways that it can catch it. At this point, we're past here. We know we've got 3 strings and 1 Boolean. So now we're ready to actually hit our endpoint. Now the endpoint is right here, right? This is our actually like database, fake database endpoint. So here, let's go ahead and make a request. We're just going to await here, fetch, and we're going to fetch to this spot. Now JSON server, like we've already seen, requires that you pass along a method of post if you're going to do this. And we'll have the same headers that we had before. So maybe let's just actually jump over here and steal this right here, right? So let's grab this and drop it in right here. So we're going to pass along that same kind of stuff. And in this case, what we're going to do is pass along the actual body that we got from our API endpoint, the title, the description, the URL, and the isRead. So here, the body will be just that. Well, json.stringify. We're going to pass along each of those items. Now, we have sanitized these on the front end, but if for some reason somebody hits this endpoint from another way, we want to make sure that we've also sanitized it here as well. So I'm going to take the title. We're just going to use the sanitize package once again. That should have imported up top. There you go. And let's go ahead and pass in the title. And it knows it's a string, so we don't have to do that other dance we did before. I'm going to copy this down a couple times, grab the first ones here and say description, and then we'll do the same thing here. We'll change this to URL. And then finally, we're just going to have the isRead. We know this is a Boolean, so we should be set to go because we would have thrown an error up here if it was not. Okay, so now we're going to post all this to the actual endpoint. We're almost done, but we need to do one more thing, and that is we just need to make sure we actually get back a positive response. If it's not okay, then we're going to throw a new error. We'll say there was a problem with the server rec. Okay, so assuming that we've actually got back a positive response, it actually passes back the entire thing to us along with an ID that it attaches to it. So if that is the case, we should be good right here. I'm just going to return then a new response. And here we're going to JSON.stringify a few things. So let's JSON.stringify, and this is sending this back to our front end. We're going to pass along a message property. This is just going to say success, or I guess it could actually be the thing we get back if we wanted to. So we could just say the rec, that works. And then let's also have a success property. This is just going to be true. And then finally, I think there should be a status of 201 since we've added it to a database. Okay, so we should be set and ready to go, and everything should work. So what we're doing is hitting this endpoint. We've already extracted out all these items. We're checking their type, and we're throwing an error if there's a problem with those. And then we're going to sanitize them in here just to make sure that if for some reason they hit this endpoint from another route, we're still sanitizing it before it hits our database. And then we'll actually post it to our database right here. If there's a problem, we'll throw an error. Otherwise, we're going to return the actual item that we got along with the success message and the status code of 201. In the case of an error, we've got a bunch of things handling that down here, and we should be set to go, which means we don't need this fake thing anymore down this way. So a lot involved in this first one. This is the most extensive one out of all the items we're going to create. Okay, so if we did that correctly, we should be able to come over here, and let's go ahead and first of all make sure we're console logging what we get back here. So actually, yeah, I am right here. Okay, perfect. So let's come over here. We're going to add a title. We'll add a description. Now we should have gotten this in the console here in the dev mode, and we get an object. It has success true, and the message is whatever the object we got back. So this isn't super helpful. We should probably clean that up a bit if we wanted to, but the important thing is we're getting a success true. So that means if I come over here and refresh, I should actually have it, and I do. And notice it's attached an ID to it. So cool, it's actually working. Now, once I'm over here, what I want to respond to this response that I get back. And really the only thing I care about is the res.success. So if that is the case, that means it's true. I want to do a few things. First of all, I want to go ahead and reset the form. So add form.reset. This is just a method that lives on forms, so I can clear out all the inputs at once. Next, I want to close the dialog, and I just have this selected as a dialog, and I'll just close it like this. So this query selector up top here, right? So that's what I'm selecting, and I'm closing that dialog. And then there certainly are more eloquent ways to respond to this, but what I can just do is just reload the page, and that way it will actually refetch from the server, grab all my stuff, and display it live. Now, probably what you'd want to do is have some kind of optimistic UI that inserts the stuff into the DOM and then responds to that. But again, I'm just trying to keep this real simple. All right, if there's a problem with the success, which if it's set to false, then we're going to throw a new error. And here we're just going to pass along the message we got. Here we'll just pass along the res.message. This should be whatever we've actually passed on from the server. Okay, so if we've done all that correctly, now we're finally done with this lesson. Let's see. If I come over here and add a new link, we'll click add link. It should close it, should close the dialog, and then it should reveal it over this way. Let's just double check. Yeah, there we go. Okay, perfect. Now we need to actually display these right here on the home page, and this will be much simpler for the next lesson. Now that we've got the data, let's display it. Okay, we've got all our data actually showing up over here. What we want to do is get this in the UI. And I've got a component to do that already. All we need to do is create an endpoint that can fetch that data and return it to us. So let's go ahead and come over here, and we're going to go inside the API route, and I'm just going to have get links.json.ts. Very much the same. We're going to export a const called get, all uppercase. We'll use the API route helper as well from Astro. And then we're going to be writing asynchronous code here. So let's make sure we grab that. And then we'll just simply return here the data we get. Now we're going to get this from our endpoint, right? So anybody that hits this endpoint should be able to query our localhost 3000 links. This is what we want to return back. So I'm going to once again do a little try catch. We'll catch any errors and we'll return those down this way. So the first thing we're going to do is const, we'll do a rec, or we'll await the fetch to this endpoint. It's just a GET request, so that's all I have to do. And if for some reason it's not okay, let's throw an error. So we'll say if rec.okay. If that's not okay, let's just throw a new error. We'll say like get rec was not okay. Now let's catch it down here. So let's console.log the error. And then here, let's just return a new response where we will JSON.stringify. And here we'll just have the message be the error.message. Now what we could do is check inside of here to see if it is an error. So we could say E if it's an instance of an error. Then let's go ahead and return the E.message. Otherwise, we'll just simply return. Okay, so very much the same what we did before, just doing the check inside of here. Okay, so assuming that we're here, we've gotten all the data back. Now I should be able to actually return a response here. So let's return a new response. And in this case, what I want is all the data that I got back. Now I've gotten it right here, but I need to actually convert it or stringify it. So let's come inside here. We're going to do a res. This will be await rec.json. This gives this to me so that I can actually pass it along. So what we could do is just json.stringify it right here, json.stringify, and we're going to simply pass along the rec, actually the res, right? The thing we actually got back. And then finally, why don't we go ahead and send along a status where we'll just say 200. Okay, cool. So once we hit this endpoint, we should actually get all this back. And this is all done server side. So this can happen anytime we hit this endpoint. Now, because it's a GET request, I can actually just come to it right here and just double check that it's working. So let's say get links.json. There we go. So we're actually getting them all back. So I know it's actually working. And because this is server-side rendered, I can do it right here in the kind of top level. So let's go ahead and grab all my links. We'll just await this from fetch. And what I need to do is go to my API and then get links.json like this. And it's just a GET request. So that's all I have to do. However, because it's in the front matter, I do need to pass along the starter here that says this is from my astro.url. So let's come over here. We'll do astro.url. So that's the base URL. I could even do .origin just in case this ends up being moved to a different page, and then API and then get links.json. Now all I have to do is loop over these right inside here. So we're going to take my links, we're going to map over all these, and we're going to take for each link, we're simply going to pass it to the link card. Now this link card has a link property I have to pass along, and that would just be the full link. Now I did make a slight error, and that is I have to actually get the data here. So we're going to call this links right here. We'll call this rec. And then what I'm going to do is grab my links from await rec.json, right? So I want to actually grab that and then pass it in down this way. Now it doesn't know what this is. It's just in any type right now, so it'll actually throw an error. But if I come over here to the link card, I've got this props right here. Now it actually has a link inside of here. So probably what I should do is export a type of link props and then paste all this inside here. And right here, just reference this as link props. Now, because I've exported this, I should be able to import this over this way just so I know what this is. So we're going to type this as link props, and if I hit Control and Spacebar, it should actually import that correctly as a type, and it does, so cool. Okay, so now it knows what this is, and it should display it on my homepage. So if I come back over here and refresh, there it is. It's all displaying accurately. If I come inside here, in the first lesson I talked through this, but we've got a checkbox, an H2, and then the description and a link and a button. This link is here, the button's up here. We're going to use this to delete it in a second. So now we've actually got this working live to show our data. What we're doing is whenever this page is hit, it's going to go ahead and request this from our custom API endpoint. That custom API endpoint is going to hit our database and return to us all the data we need that we then can display right down here in our link cards. So this is happening every time we hit our page. Now, if I were to add a new one, I should be able to add a new one and it should show it right away. So whatever I add over here, HTTPS, whatever, I hit add link and now it shows. Now, again, the way we had this doing it is it just reloads the page and you can optimize that a little bit more if you'd like. Okay, next what we need to do is delete individual items. We can do this with JSON server by just hitting an endpoint like links and then / whatever it happens to be for the ID. So like, I don't know, 285, what is that one? 0. All right, so if I hit this with a delete endpoint, it will delete this and return to us a success. So that's what we're going to do in the next lesson. It's time to start trashing stuff on our site. So what we want to do is be able to delete things and then they should get removed. So we need to do two things for that. First of all, I need to come over to the link card and make sure that I can actually handle this in the JavaScript. Now, the way I set up these buttons, they have a data attribute of data delete. So that way I can select all those with the data delete attribute. And then they also have an ID, which is the actual number, the ID of the actual thing. So 2580 or whatever it happens to be, this is what we can pass along. So hopefully that makes sense. And all we have to do is come down here and have a little script tag that then listens to event listeners for each of those buttons. So we're just going to say a little comment here like delete links. And then first of all, let's go ahead and grab all the delete buttons. We're going to get this from document.querySelector, and we'll grab them all. This would be anything that happens to have the data delete attribute. Now with TypeScript here, let's go ahead and just say that this is a node list of, and here we're just going to pass in HTML button elements. If you're not using TypeScript, no worries, you don't have to do that. Okay, now down here, we're just going to grab all those delete buttons, and we're going to loop over them. So we're going to say for each button, and I'll just call it a button like that, I want to add an event listener. So let's add an event listener of click. And in the callback here, we're going to do a couple of things. First of all, I want to extract out the ID. So the ID, you might remember, was on that button attribute. There's a couple ways we can do this. We can use the get attribute method. I can also just use the data set like this. And the data set was .id. So this should actually give us back the ID of what everything we've clicked on. So if I come over here and let's look at this down here in the console, if I click here, it should give me whatever the ID happens to be. That's what I want, because that's what I want to pass along to a dynamic API endpoint. So let's go ahead and do a try catch once again. We'll catch any errors. And for right now, let's just console.log the error. Okay, so in this try, the first thing I want to do is just say that if there is no ID, so if that doesn't exist for some reason, which it always should, but in case it doesn't, then I want to go ahead and throw a new error. We'll just say like no ID present. Okay, so assuming that we're good, now I want to come down here and go ahead and hit a dynamic endpoint. So we're going to request here and await to fetch. And here this needs to be dynamic, so we're going to hit an API and then eventually whatever the ID happens to be .json. So we haven't set this up yet, but remember this needs to be a type of delete because that's what we're going to handle on the server side. So I'm going to say method is type of delete, and then let's do the same kind of thing where we're going to say if the request was not okay, then we're just going to grab this right here and copy it down, and we'll just say delete request was not okay. Now you'll notice I'm getting some errors here, and that's because I need to have this as an async function so that I can do this awaiting down here. So assuming I'm good, I should get back a response. And all I want to do is console log it just to make sure that we know it's being deleted. So I'm just going to say deleted. All right, assuming that we're good down here. And then the last thing I want to do is close this button or actually get rid of this whole thing. Now I could reload the page again. That's what we did last time. Except in this case, it's real easy just to look up the prototype or look up the actual DOM and check for the closest article and then just get rid of that. So let's just come inside here. We're just going to say button.closest. And we're just going to look for anything with an article tag. And if it exists, so let's just do a quick check on that. Then we're going to use the remove method just to get it off the DOM. So all it's doing is checking for this article tag. Inside this button is going to look up and find it right here, right? So it's going to delete the closest one from the DOM. And then if we were to reload, it will not be there anymore anyhow, right? So hopefully that works. If I come over here and click, it should get rid of it in a second. Right now it's not hitting this. It's actually going to console log the error because it will not have found the endpoint. You can see that down here. So now we're all set except for the endpoint. Let's come back over here, and inside the API, I'm just going to create a dynamic route here. So we're going to use this ID for both the delete and eventually the patch request as well. So this will be .json.ts. So right inside here, let's first of all handle the delete. So this will be delete all uppercase. API route, help us out again. And then let's do some async work inside here where all we're going to do is hit that endpoint. Now in this case, we need to get the param, right? Because that's the thing we passed in. So let's go ahead and grab our params right here. Then I should be able to get the ID off of that. This will just be params.id. It's just the name of whatever the thing happens to be. So let's first of all just make sure that we've got an ID. So if somebody hits this endpoint with a delete method and they don't have an ID, that we can go ahead and throw an error. So let's do that. We'll throw a new error. Now in order for this to get caught, we do need to actually put this inside of a try catch. So let's do a try. We'll add that there. And then down here, we're going to have a catch with our error. Now, rather than reinventing the wheel, let's come over and steal some of the stuff from before. So let's see, let's grab all this catch right here, and we're just going to do the same thing over this way. So let's add this here. All right, cool. I guess we had another response down here too, didn't we? That's why we should have used the more efficient one we wrote last time, but that's all right. Okay, so I should get one of those two things if there's an error. Assuming that there's not an error, all I want to do is hit my endpoint. So here, let's go ahead and request. We're going to await a fetch. This will simply be to whatever this is right here, and we want to make sure that we can do this dynamically. And I need to add one more thing, which would be the ID at the end of this. And remember, this has to be a type or a method of delete. And that's it. So assuming that I got this back, I guess I should first of all check to make sure that it's okay. Otherwise, I'll throw a new error that just says what it is. And then down here, we should get back a response. So assuming everything was good, we should just be able to return a new response. And in this case, we don't need to pass anything back. I'm just going to pass along a status. This will just be 204 to say that something has been successfully deleted. Okay, so we should actually be able to delete these now as we need to. So let's come over here, and I'm just going to click here, and hopefully this will work. All right, got rid of that. If I refresh, there we go. Okay, so it is actually working properly. And if I come over here, it should be gone as well. Cool, so now we've actually got this working dynamically. The last thing we need to do is create a little patch response here so that when I click this, not only with a UI update, which happens automatically, but I can actually hit this same dynamic ID and patch that individual item. All right, we are so close, just one more lesson left, and that is how to handle this data is read checkbox. So when we check it or delete it, we can actually update the API endpoint. That API endpoint will then hit this local host, whatever it happens to be, and patch the individual item to swap it from true to false. Okay, so what we need to do is grab anything that happens to have a data is read attribute. So let's come down here, and we're going to do like update links or is read links. Now, come to think of it, this should be very similar to what we did up top. So maybe I could just grab all this and update some items. So let's see what we can do here. So let's come down here, and I'm going to add them in right here. Obviously, we need to change this around. We're going to hit Command and D and change these both to is read buttons or something like that. So for each of these, when they click, I want to grab the ID. That all works. If there's not an ID, I don't want to hit that. I do want to hit it right here. However, I need this to be a patch type. Now, the patch allows us to update individual items, and I need to pass along a body. So let's send along headers. This will be content type, and this will be application/JSON. Now, finally, I need to pass along a body. This body will just be the item I want to update. And all I'm wanting to do is say if it's true or false. So let's stringify the isRead property. So that's one more thing we need to grab. So I've got the ID. Now I just need to grab the isRead. And this will just be whether or not the button is checked. So if it is checked, I obviously want to flop it, etc., etc. So we'll say isRead right here. And then down this way, we're going to change this to patch. And here we'll just say patched or updated. How about that? Updated. Now, I don't need to remove the entire thing, so let's not do that. But I think all the rest of that works just fine, right? So all we're going to do is double check that there is isRead. I guess we should also just make sure that isRead is there, which I don't know why it wouldn't be because it is a checkbox. But so we should get back something here. And this shouldn't be already checked. It should be checked. It's giving me an error because this still thinks they're buttons. This is an HTML input element. So now this check should work. And maybe just to make sure this is clear, let's change both of these to isRead checks or something like that. And then I'll say here for each check, let's grab all those. And do we have any other checks down here or BTNs? No. Okay. So now we should be able to hit this endpoint with a patch request that then updates a single property. So let's come back over here. We're going to do the same thing, except I'm just going to copy all this delete, and we'll do another one down here, except this will be a patch. So I need to change this to patch. We're going to pick off the same ID, right? We want to make sure there's an ID. There's no ID provided. That's just fine. Here, once again, we need to change this to patch. And if there's an error, we're going to say the patch request server side failed. All the rest of this, I think, should be fine. There was an unknown error. That's all good. So it's just here in the patch we need to update. And we can go ahead and pass along the headers. That will be the same as what we did over here. So let's go ahead and steal this right here instead of redoing that ourselves. There we go. And then finally, we need to pass along a body. Now this will just be json.stringify. And what I want to do is stringify whether or not something is read or is not read. Now remember, I passed that along with the body that I already got. So I should be able to get that off of the request, which I need to pull in here. Request. That's what we did for the add item as well, you might remember. So here I can just extract out of here the isRead. We're going to get this from await request.json. All right, so this should be true or false. So I suppose we could do the same thing right here, where we also check that isRead is there. All right, so let's come back down this way. We're just going to stringify isRead. Okay, so hopefully this works. We've got false and we've got true. So that should be reflected here. It is cool. If I hit this endpoint and I refresh, it's not working. So why is that? If I come over here, let's see. I think we need to actually flop this around, right? So isRead is equal to the opposite of whatever isRead is. Although I don't know that this is going to work because I think it's going to be a string. Let's just go ahead and check right here. Here I'm just going to check the type of isRead. So let's go ahead and click right here, and I should get something on the console right over here, and I'm not seeing anything. So let's just make sure I'm actually getting anything inside here, like in here. All right, let's make sure it's actually hitting this endpoint, which should be with a patch to my actual API / whatever happens to be .json. So this should be correct. Passing along isRead one way or the other. I guess let's also make sure that we're getting something here. All right, not the world's best debugging, but if I click over here, it should say something. I'm not seeing anything. Okay, so maybe there's a problem with our actual selection. Aha, the culprit right here. Data delete, I didn't change one thing. All right, what are these called? Data isRead. Okay, so now it should actually hit the patch, right? So if I come over here and click this, something is happening, no ID is present. So I think we've got some logic errors here, right? Because this could be false, so that's probably why it's throwing that, so we're not going to worry about that. All right, let's try one more time. If I click here and refresh, something is happening, but not what we expect. This is saying in here, isRead is a Boolean. Okay, so it is giving me the proper thing. So I should be able to just use it like this over this way. So let's get rid of this, and let's get rid of this, and let's come down here, and let's pass it in just like this. Let's see what happens. So if I click here and refresh, that is working. If I select it, now it's still working. Okay, cool. So I don't actually need to flip it because when I'm getting it from the checked input on the front end, it should be getting me whatever the correct thing should be at that point because it's already been clicked, right? So it's already either checked or unchecked. So now it should actually work properly. If I click this here, we should go to false for both of these, and they are. Once I refresh, same thing over here, true. And now they're both true if I refresh. Cool. I can delete items, I can add new items, I can open the false links if I want to. That means everything is properly working. We've got a full CRUD app, again, just using JSON server for now. Now, occasionally, obviously, you're going to run into errors, and being able to just debug and figure out where the error is and track it down is super helpful. There are more efficient ways besides console logging everywhere, but at least that gets you what you need, and that's what we've just done right now. Now, what I want to do in the next module is explore something called Astro DB. We're going to first of all just look at it at a high level and understand how to use it, and then we're going to use this project and swap out all of our stuff to JSON server to actually now interact with Astro DB.